All right, good morning, guys. Alex here, continuing back with our competition series. This week we're talking about what programming should look like leading up to and through either a season or a competition that we're trying to peak for. So we're going to talk about preseason training, what that looks like, in-season training, and then also peaking, or if we're trying to become the best that we can possibly be physically for a specific event, for a single event, okay? And obviously there are going to be some differences in here in what the programming will look like between a sport like a ball sport, like football or basketball, baseball, so on and so forth, where training in the weight room does not directly replicate the conditions of the sport. And then another sport, such as weightlifting or track and field in a way, where what we're doing in training directly impacts the performance in the sport, and that the training in and of itself is a skill that we're trying to develop so that we can improve our ability in the sport. Okay? So there's going to be a little bit of a difference there. It's going to be a little nuanced. We'll talk about each of these different styles of training or each of these different styles of programming in the context of that sport. Okay? But generally speaking, we're going to try and put everything in those two baskets. It's either a sport like football, baseball, hockey, where what we're doing in the weight room and off the court, ice, field, whatever you want to call it, is general physical preparedness. It's trying to improve our athleticism and fitness so that we can be a better athlete when we go and try and execute sports-specific skills. Okay, and then that's one basket. Other basket is weightlifting, powerlifting, CrossFit, track and field, where the training is the sport. Okay, so first, what we're going to talk about when we talk about these different times of the year, okay, preseason, in-season, peaking, we're going to talk generally about the three most important variables when it comes to programming, and we're going to talk about them at a high level, and they are volume. Volume is the amount of work that you're doing. We typically talk about rep volume specifically when we refer to this. So we're talking about the number of sets that you perform in a given training session multiplied by the number of reps you perform. Okay, so we're talking about rep volume today. All right, intensity, that is the difficulty or the perceived difficulty of the movement that you're doing or the modality that you're in. Okay, this is often executed or discussed in terms of a percentage. Okay, so when we're talking about percentage, a high intensity effort would be above 85%. Moderate intensity, generally speaking, 65 to 85%. Low intensity, anything below 65 or below 60, somewhere in that threshold. Okay. Frequency is the last one. So when we're talking about frequency, we're talking about how often are you working out. Okay. So how many times during a week are you getting training sessions in? Those are the three most important variables when we're talking about total workload. Okay. So preseason, this is like the 6 to 12 weeks leading up to your season, quote unquote. So if you're a football player, this is the summer, this is training camp or two-a-days. Obviously, that's one example. If you are a track and field athlete going into outdoor season, this is likely the season or the transition period between indoor season and outdoor season. There's several examples, but just think about this as the training cycle or the 12 weeks, okay, leading up to your season. During this time, this is the time to maximize output in the gym or in training outside of the sport, all right? What we're going to be doing is we're going to have a moderate to high degree of volume, okay? So we're going to have a pretty significant workload during this time as we push the body to its limits physically to get it in the best physical shape that it can be prior to the season, okay? Because we're not competing at this time, we can afford to put a little bit of extra effort into our training outside of the sport, all right? So we're gonna have moderate to high volume there. Obviously, this is gonna be relative depending on the population that you're working with, so that's why we're just kind of speaking in generalities. It takes a much more in-depth approach to look at the population in terms of age and experience that you're working with to determine exactly what moderate to high to low volume looks like, but we're not going to quite get into that today, so we're just going to speak in this in relative terms. All right. Intensity is again going to be moderate to high. Now understand the relationship between volume and intensity. Generally, the higher the amount of volume that you're doing, okay, you want a more moderate to low degree of intensity. All right. formula for failure, not failure, but the formula for burying your athletes in the ground is high volume and high intensity. All right? So the intensity that you're looking to utilize, so remember that those thresholds that we talked about before, those percentages, higher intensities, lower volumes. All right? Lower intensities, higher volumes in order to see results. Okay? So again, preseason, moderate to high volume, and this is going to increase. So it's going to decrease. The amount of volume that you're utilizing in your preseason program, so in that 12 weeks, should decrease over those 12 weeks as we get closer to being in season, all right? And conversely, the intensity should increase as we get closer to the in-season period, all right? So the difficulty of each movement, all right, the percentages that you're using, the rate of perceived exertion from your athletes, that should increase as you get closer to your in-season, all right? And lastly, frequency. How often are you training? That should be higher as you get closer to the season again, all right? As we increase intensity, decrease volume, and allow ourselves to kind of get in the maximal or best physical preparedness that we can have prior to the season, frequency should again be high leading up to that so that we can continue to gain those adaptations prior to that period, right? Then as we transition to the in-season period, and this is most relevant for the common sports that we think about that have a 3 to 4 month or longer season, okay? So we're not talking about like weightlifting where you're peaking for one event a year, all right? This is talking about sports that have longer seasons of up to even 6 months in some sports, all right? When we are in season, I'm not going to talk about or extol the virtues of in-season training. It should be obvious by this point that in-season training, if you're not doing it, you should be doing it. But we're not going to talk about the whys of that here today. We're just going to assume that you understand that that's something that you should be doing for yourself. Okay, in season with your athletes or with yourself, volume should be low. Okay, so you shouldn't be having these massive workloads in your training outside of the sport itself. Obviously, you don't want to take a lot of the energy reserves and the body's capacity to recover and put that towards training, okay, off of the ice, or off of field, court, whatever it ends up being, okay? Whatever your sport is, the majority of your recovery and time spent should be in that sport. So that said, volume lower, okay? Intensity should remain high, okay? Should be very, very high. And that's very intentional. We want that intensity to remain high so that your body continues to carry over those adaptations, those improvements in strength, coordination, power, so on and so forth. We want your body to remember that, okay? And a lot of people are afraid of having high intensity in season. And let's understand that when we train at a high intensity, because our volume is low, the overall damage that we're doing to our body's systems, the muscular systems and the central nervous systems, isn't going to have a significant impact on performance, okay? In terms of recovery, it's actually going to allow performance to be heightened because we're continuing to carry these adaptations that we've made in the preseason through to the in-season. So those gains in strength, power, agility, so on and so forth, we're carrying those and we're keeping that intensity high to make sure that none of those diminish during the season, okay? And again, frequency lowers, all right? So again, this is just another way to make sure that we're managing fatigue, ensuring that the majority of our efforts and time and energy spent goes into the sport, into practicing the sport, okay? So again, in season, low amount of volume, all right? So not a lot of workload in each session. High intensity, make sure that what you're doing is intense, all right? But again, you're not doing a lot of it. And frequency low, all right? So then we're talking 2, maybe 3 times a week, all right, for core lifts, okay? And then finally, peaking. So this is if you are an athlete that is working towards a single competition. So let's say you're a track and field athlete. Obviously, there are several events throughout the year that you want to perform well at, and that's kind of where like an in-season program comes into play. But really what you're trying to do is you're trying to peak for that final event of the year where you can PR whatever it is that you're trying to do, okay? Or maybe if you're a sport athlete, this might be playoffs, okay? Or whatever it might be for the end of the season. That's what you're working towards, depending on what level of play you're at and how good your team is. So an excellent football team, state championship might be, if you feel like you're a state contender, you know, state playoffs is going to be what you're worried about. If you're a team that's not feeling like you're going to make state that year if you're a high school team, then maybe the conference or sectional playoffs is where you're trying to peak. So you got to, as a strength coach, kind of feel out how the quality of your team and try and use that to drive where your in-season program should end and where peaking should begin. All right. But when we're talking about peaking, what's going to happen in a peak, we're talking about like 3 weeks or 4 weeks leading up to that single competition in which you want your players or yourself to be the most physically prepared you can be. All right. Again, volume is going to stay low, just like it was during the in-season, all right? So we're not training and performing a lot of work each session for obvious reasons, all right? Intensity, in the early parts of the peak, we're keeping intensity high, just like we did in season, all right? So intensities are gonna be above 85% of perceived effort, all right? The difference between peaking and in-season is that as we approach the competition, intensity needs to decrease, all right? So usually this happens in like the end of the 3rd week of a 4-week cycle, and then certainly in the last week. And that's happening to allow our body to just recover and allow that super compensation to take effect. What we talked about in our last series, the How We Get Fit series, we're allowing our body to super compensate, become fully recovered, and for it to just generally feel its physical best. So we're getting to that place where fatigue has totally dissipated because we've dropped our intensity and our volume, okay? And our physical fitness has optimized, all right? It's super compensated in that state. Then finally, frequency, again, low in general physical preparedness, so we should not be spending a lot of time training physical skills outside of our sport. Okay, so low there. However, it should be high on the sport-specific skills, okay? So you should be practicing very frequently, 5 times a week or as often as you can that you can recover from in the sport, practicing those skills to help you perform your best on game day and feel confident in those skills, right? So hopefully that provides a little bit of insight if you're a strength coach or a sport coach in helping you understand how to optimally prepare your athletes both in the field of play and outside in the weight room or in your off-court, off-ice, off field training, so on and so forth. So hope you guys got something from that. I know it was a little bit of a longer episode today, but it's a very complex topic. Again, this sort of takes a great understanding of where your athletes are at, both in terms of their training age and their biological age, okay? In any case, we'll get into those details on future episodes. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and we'll talk soon.